What if one of the gentlest bands of the 1970s was hiding one of the quietest and most painful feuds in soft rock history? What if the warm love songs that defined a generation were created by two men who could barely sit in the same room together? They wrote melodies that drifted like sunlight, harmonies that soothed an entire era, and ballads that became wedding staples across the world. Yet, behind the curtain, heartbreak, resentment, betrayal, and creative warfare slowly pulled the group apart. One songwriter became the face of the band while the other felt erased. One voice dominated the charts while another felt sidelined. And decades later, lawsuits, bitterness, and tragedy would confirm the truth. Bread sounded like harmony, but they lived in conflict. This is the story of how soft rock's smoothest band finally shattered. When soft rock was born in the shadows. Los Angeles in the late 1960s was a creative explosion. Psychedelic rock poured out of Sunset Boulevard. Laurel Canyon was packed with songwriters chasing the dream. But David Gates did not sound like the chaos around him. He carried the polished instincts of a producer, the calm presence of a studio veteran, and a hunger to craft songs that were clean, elegant, and built to last. Gates had come from Tulsa, Oklahoma, where he had played alongside a young Leon Russell in small clubs and garages. He was not a wild rock performer. He was methodical, thoughtful, and almost obsessively controlled. When he moved to Los Angeles, he found work arranging and producing for other artists, quietly building connections. Rob Royer, meanwhile, was the opposite kind of creator. He came from a more poetic background, fascinated with structure, harmony, and lyrical nuance. He played multiple instruments and carried ideas that stretched beyond the simplicity of pop radio. His talent was subtle, but very real. James Griffin completed the triangle. Griffin was the emotional core and perhaps the purest vocalist of the three. His voice had a raspy ache, a soulful pull that could turn even the simplest melody into a confession. He and Royer had already been a songwriting duo. Together they wrote with feeling and vulnerability. When Royer introduced Gates to Griffin, something clicked instantly. Gates had the discipline. Griffin had the fire. Royer had the color. They were three very different musicians, but their strengths combined into something new. They formed Bread in 1968 and signed with Elektra Records in January of the following year. The name was deliberately plain, reflecting a simple image. Bread was essential, universal, and familiar. They wanted their music to feel the same way. From the beginning, there were warning signs. Gates and Griffin respected each other, but they did not understand each other. Gates approached music like a surgeon. Griffin approached it like a poet. Their visions would eventually collide, but for now, the dream was alive. The band recorded its first album with legendary session drummer Jim Gordon, one of the most in-demand musicians in Los Angeles. Bread made their live debut on July 25, 1969 at the Aquarius Theater in Hollywood. Gates felt the excitement rising. Griffin felt the pressure. Royer felt the potential. The first single, Dismal Day, released in June 1969, did not chart. Still, Elektra believed in them, and it was only a matter of time before the world would hear what Gates had been building. Before we continue, do not forget to like and subscribe to the channel. The dream began to take shape in 1970 when Mike Botts became their permanent drummer. He had previously worked with Gates, and their chemistry was instant. With Botts on board, Bread felt like a real band for the first time. Their second album, On the Waters, released in July 1970, changed everything. One song would lift Bread from obscurity into the center of the American pop landscape, and the rise would be faster than any of them expected. But the warning signs were already there. The golden rise and the cracks no one saw. Make It With You arrived in the summer of 1970 like a quiet storm. Soft, warm, and impossibly intimate, the song glided up the charts until it reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. For millions of listeners trying to escape the noise of the era, it felt like a sanctuary. But inside the band, the success created something else entirely. Balance started to tilt. David Gates' voice was suddenly everywhere. He had written the hit. He had sung it. Radio programmers saw him as the center of Bread. Elektra records reinforced the image, and fans unknowingly absorbed it. James Griffin noticed within days. The crowd reacted louder when Gates stepped to the mic. Journalists asked about Gates first. Photographers pointed their lenses at him. Interviews subtly shifted toward the idea that Bread was his band. The irony was devastating. Griffin had believed the group would operate as a true creative partnership. Instead, gatekeepers were selecting a favorite. Then Bread released It Does Not Matter to Me, another Gates composition, another major hit. Gates stayed calm through it all, but Griffin quietly unraveled. He felt erased, ignored, invisible, and Royer watched helplessly. The band's next album, Mana, arrived in March 1971. It included 2 defining songs, Let Your Love Go, a powerful rocker, and If, a soft ballad destined to become a wedding staple. Both were written by Gates, both depended on his serene voice, and both pushed Griffin further into the shadows. During this period, Bread toured constantly. Their sound was gentle, but their schedule was punishing. City after city, interview after interview. Griffin and Gates barely spoke except when required. Royer tried bridging the gap, but he could not drag the 2 men toward each other. Here is what most people didn't understand. Bread sounded peaceful, but the environment inside the band was anything but. The pressure of constant touring cracked their unity. Griffin resented the set lists, which leaned heavily on Gates' material. Gates resented the emotional volatility in the room. Royer resented being stuck between 2 clashing personalities. A fracture had begun. If you are enjoying this deep dive into the real story behind Bread, hit the like button so more music fans can find it. The situation worsened in 1971 when Royer reached his breaking point. He felt unheard creatively, frustrated personally, and exhausted by the rising conflict between Gates and Griffin. He quit quietly, leaving a hole that could not be patched emotionally. Larry Neckel replaced him, a gifted Wrecking Crew legend, a man with impossible musical proficiency. But the addition of a session master only deepened the shift toward a Gates-centered sound. Still, the ascent continued. Bread was everywhere now. The album Baby On Mama Want You delivered hit after hit. The title track climbed to the top 5. Everything I Own and Diary followed, both charting beautifully. On adult contemporary to radio, they were unstoppable. For fans who grew up in that era, Bread became the soundtrack of first loves, long drives, and warm summer nights. Their songs felt timeless, gentle, and true. But inside the studio, tension rose with every take. Griffin tried offering more of his own material. Elektra turned most of it down. Even when Griffin did contribute a song to an album, it was rarely chosen as a single. He felt like he was carrying an instrument that no one wanted to hear. Gates was not malicious, but ambition guided him. He pursued perfection, he pursued control, and he pursued the spotlight because he believed he could keep the band stable if he took the lead. But the more Gates controlled, the more Griffin burned. The worst part, they still sang beautiful harmonies together. 2 voices locked like puzzle pieces, 2 men drifting farther apart with each note. The ground was beginning to shake under Bread, but few fans knew. To the outside world, they seemed untouchable, but they had no idea the ground was collapsing beneath them. when the harmony turned into a war. By late 1972, Bread was living in two worlds. On the charts, they were dominant. In their personal relationships, they were imploding. The Guitar Man was released in October of that year. It represented everything Bread had become: precise, polished, and meticulously built around the Gates aesthetic. The title track reached the top 15. Sweet Surrender and Aubrey followed, both landing heavy rotation on soft AC playlists. And once again, the spotlight fell squarely on Gates. Griffin felt devastated. His talent had not diminished. His songwriting was still rich. His voice still carried raw emotional weight. But the industry machine no longer saw him. His band no longer reflected him. Behind the scenes, the feud between Gates and Griffin became impossible to ignore. Studio sessions grew cold. Arguments broke out over rhythm parts, harmonies, even the order of songs. Gates demanded consistency and clarity. Griffin demanded fairness and space. They were both right, and both completely wrong for each other. The band kept touring, but Griffin's morale crumbled. He resented that nearly all promotional material centered on Gates. Fans approached Gates first. Interviewers praised Gates first. Even radio DJs began referring to Bread as David Gates Group. Griffin once told a close friend that he felt like he was watching someone else drive the car I helped build. The strain finally broke in May 1973 in Salt Lake City. Hours before a sold-out show at the Salt Palace, the band's equipment was stolen. Instruments, amplifiers, and gear vanished overnight. What should have been a moment for unity turned into an eruption. Gates was furious about the logistics. Griffin was furious about the leadership imbalance. Knechtel and Botts tried to calm the storm, but it was useless. This was the moment Griffin emotionally left the band. Not officially, not yet. But the split began in that instant. Just weeks later, Bread was done. No announcement, no farewell, just a quiet, exhausted collapse. The irony was agonizing. Their music was built on gentleness, yet their breakup was a silent war. Elektra Records released the best of Bread in March 1973. Instead of healing the wounds, its success made the pain worse. The compilation sold extraordinarily well. For many fans, it was the definitive soft rock album of the decade. But Griffin saw the track list. He saw the singles. He saw the credits. And to him, it looked like proof that the world believed Bread was Gates alone. Meanwhile, Gates went solo and found success. Griffin tried launching new projects but struggled. Royer continued writing behind the scenes. Years passed. But Elektra wanted another reunion. In 1976, they got it. The original members returned to the studio and crafted Lost Without Your Love. The title song reached the top 10 and once again pushed Gates to the E, front. But the reunion was not a reconciliation. It was a business deal. The bitterness between Gates and Griffin only deepened. Griffin was fighting personal battles, including rising substance issues. Gates distanced himself quietly but firmly. By 1978, Bread imploded again, this time permanently. Griffin attempted to tour using the name. Gates sued him. Griffin sued back. The legal fight lasted 6 years. 6 years of courtrooms, 6 years of paperwork, 6 years of two former partners refusing to let the other win. If you want more deep dives into bands that fell apart behind the scenes, comment the name of the next group you want covered. The lawsuit finally ended in 1984, not with forgiveness, not with peace, just exhaustion. The dream was dead, and the damage would prove irreversible. The echoes of everything they lost. When Bread collapsed for the second time in 1978, the silence that followed was heavier than any argument the band ever had. There was no farewell tour, no public announcement, no dramatic press release. The band simply slipped out of the spotlight and scattered in different directions, each member carrying wounds that would take years to surface and even longer to understand. David Gates retreated from the chaos almost immediately. He released solo music during the late 1970s and early 1980s, but he did it quietly. Gates was not built for celebrity battles or public conflict. He preferred the stability of family life, ranch work, and songwriting at a steady pace. He rarely gave interviews. He rarely discussed Bread at all. The man whose voice had carried the soft rock era now slipped into a life defined by calm, distance, and deliberate privacy. James Griffin took a very different path. He could not simply walk away from the past. He did not want the story to end the way it had. Griffin kept writing, recording, and performing. He released solo material and collaborated with Rob Royer in multiple projects, including the country and folk influence group Toast, but nothing he attempted brought him the emotional or commercial validation he had tasted inside Bread. Griffin was too passionate, too expressive, and too wounded to detach. He carried the breakup with him like a shadow. Royer, the quiet architect of the band's earliest chemistry, found steady footing in Nashville. He continued writing songs for other artists, built new creative partnerships, and slowly rebuilt the confidence that had been shaken during Bread's internal wars. His admiration for Griffin never faded, and the two remained artistic companions long after Bread dissolved. Meanwhile, the legal scars continued to deepen. The lawsuits between Gates and Griffin did not just damage their professional relationship, they annihilated any possibility of closure. The legal battle over the Bread name stretched from 1978 to 1984, draining time, money, and energy from both sides. Griffin believed he deserved equal ownership of the legacy they had created. Gates believed the public image of Bread had to be protected and controlled. Courts became battlegrounds. Attorneys replaced bandmates. The ruling eventually favored Gates more strongly, but by the end, both men had lost something far more important than money. They had lost the bond that made the music possible. For a long time, the story seemed frozen. Bread was over. Fans assumed the members would never share a stage again. And for nearly 2 decades, that assumption was correct. Then the 1990s arrived. Nostalgia surged. Classic rock radio revived old favorites. Audiences who grew up with Bread were entering their middle years, longing for the soundtracks of their youth. And suddenly, promoters began to call. In 1996, something no one expected happened. Bread reunited. David Gates, James Griffin, Larry Knechtel, and Mike Botts agreed to perform together again for a 25th anniversary tour. It was delicate, tentative, and driven by demand rather than restored friendship. But when they stepped onto the stage for the first time, something remarkable occurred. The harmonies were still there, the songs still carried warmth, the audience still knew every word. For a brief moment, it felt like the past might finally heal. The tour extended into 1997 with strong attendance, enthusiastic fans, and glowing reviews. Yet behind the scenes, the old dynamic returned. Gates kept to himself. Griffin wrestled with disappointment that the deeper issues had never been resolved. The reunion was professionally successful but emotionally hollow. By the end of 1997, Bread was finished for the final time. This time, there were no illusions about what came next. There would be no fourth attempt, no final reconciliation, no repaired partnership. The curtain had closed forever. Then came the losses. James Griffin passed away from complications of cancer in early 2005. He was only in his early 60s. His death devastated the fan base and deeply affected Royer, who had remained emotionally connected to him for decades. Mike Botts, the drummer who had given Bread its heartbeat, also died in 2005. Larry Knechtel, the legendary multi-instrumentalist who elevated the band's sound during the early 1970s, passed away in 2009. One by one, the voices that created Bread's soft, warm world began to fade. Today, David Gates lives a quiet and private life far removed from the spotlight. Rob Royer continues creating music and has released memoirs and tributes documenting the real story behind the band. But the legacy of Bread remains far stronger than the relationships that created it. Across weddings, anniversaries, romantic films, and radio stations, Bread's songs continue to play. Everything I Own remains one of the most tender love songs ever written. If it's still quoted in vows and poems, Baby I Am a Want You is still instantly recognizable after more than 50 years. For listeners who grew up in the 1970s, these songs are not just melodies. They are memories. They are moments. They are pieces of time preserved in music that feels both deeply personal and universally relatable. The story of Bread is a story of contrasts, gentle music born from harsh disagreements, warm harmonies created by musicians who struggle to harmonize in life, a soothing sound shaped by fractured relationships. Bread proved that soft rock could be powerful. They proved that quiet music could dominate an era. They proved that emotional stillness could move millions. But they also proved something else. Even the softest songs can come from the hardest. Conflicts. What is your memory of Bread? Share it in the comments. And do not forget to like and subscribe for more stories from music's past.